Hey guys, Shane here. So welcome to part 2 of my 251/3 command vehicle build for the Kursk75 group build. So in this episode, we're going to be painting and weathering the interior of the command vehicle using Tamiya paints for the first time in this channel. So I'm going to start by laying a base coat for the Dunkelgelb, which is going to be done with a mixture of XF79 deck brown as well as XF60 dark yellow, and it's going to give us like a sandy brown. I'm also going to add equal parts FX60 to FX79 to create a kind of sandy brown colour, which is going to be the base colour, and then I'm going to mix it with equal parts Tamiya Thinner X20. I'm going to start applying it using very thin coats over my pre-prime model. In this case I've used Vallejo Surface Primer Grey, and I'm using a 0.2 needle on my hard-run Stream Deck Evolution. And I must say I'm really impressed with how Tamiya paints airbrush. It's my first time ever using it, and it goes down ultra matte and very smooth as long as you put it down in fine coats. So the purpose of this base coat is just to add a bit of warmth to the Dunkelgelb coat before we start adding progressively lighter coats. Again, it's kind of optional, but I just wanted to add something to add an element of shade and shadow. So with our base coat allowed to dry, we're going to go back to our XF60 dark yellow, and we're also going to take some XF55, which is deck tan, and this is going to be our main Dunkelgelb colour. And I'm going to mix this roughly in a 60:40 ratio, with the XF60 being the dominant colour. Now I make this a little bit too light, so it somewhat resembles more late war Dunkelgelb, which is a slightly more creamy colour. However, if you want to avoid this, you can just add more XF60 to the mix and progressively make it lighter that way. And once again, I'm going to start applying these in very fine dusting coats and slowly building up the colour. I do want to see some of the darker sandy brown colour showing through, which will add some interesting shade value to the model. So I really want to keep that around panel lines and what have you. And you can see here I'm literally doing the paint job a panel at a time. So I'll just work on one panel for a few minutes, lay down a very light coat, and then I'll move on to another panel and keep switching that way. That case you don't build up too much paint too quick, and it ensures that you keep your layers of paint quite thin. So you can see the step does take a little bit of time, however it is worth the effort, and keeping things in sub-assemblies, especially with an open topped vehicle like a 251 Halftrack, really does allow us to get into the detail. If I was to assemble this model in full, it would make painting these details far more difficult. So with the Dunkelgelb layer allowed to dry, now I'm going to add a glaze of clear yellow. I felt I went a bit too light and I want to add a bit more of a yellow warmth or hue to the model. So I'm going to switch to a 0.4mm needle on my Hartmann Steenbeck, and we're going to glaze the model with a coat of clear yellow. So the clear yellow is a very different consistency to the acrylic paints. It's very thick, almost syrup-like. So I did find when I was tinning this, which by right I really should have been using a lacquer thinner instead of the X22 I was using. However, it will work, but if you can get your hands on lacquer thinner, I would recommend using that more. And I did put a higher ratio of thinner to paint, as this paint is far thicker. I say I put about 60-40 paint thinner ratio, with the thinner being the dominant ratio, as this paint is just so thick. I'm just going to dust the model this glaze, being very careful not to overwhelm or swamp any of the areas with this colour. And you can see it adds a very warm hue to the very bleached colour that we went for. Now this is an optional, of course. If you don't want to do this, you don't have to. You can do this with oils if you want. But I just found it just reinforced that yellow hue that I felt that I had taken out of the model. I think I desaturated it or saturated it too much. But again, keep this coat very light and do not swamp the surface of the model with this, or you'll destroy your work. So you can see the effect that this paint has. It immediately warms our dark yellow to give it a slightly warmer hue. Even if you feel it's a bit too warm, we can again weather this back with oils later, but it's better just to reinforce it now. So moving on to another first for the channel, we're going to be using some artist or modeling oils to do some modulation. So I'm going to be using the 502 base color modulation set, and we're going to be using 5 out of 6 colors just to add a bit of different shades and values to our interior. So I'm using plastic cups to do this, so be aware that the white spirit after a couple of hours will eat right through these cups, so you have to dispose of these the moment you're finished with them. So I'm going to be using 5 out of 6. I'm using every colour in the set except the black, as I felt it was just a little bit too dark for what I wanted. And I'm doing about 10% oil paint to 90% thinner ratio. This should be just a very light tint. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just remove the excess or the majority of the wash off my brush with a piece of paper. And I'm literally just going to start picking out panels with various different colours. So in this case, I'm going to start using the magenta, and I'm going to pick out just various different panels just to add a slight different hue. It just adds a slight tint of colour just to break it up a little bit. But you want as little wash on your brush as possible. I'm only going to be doing this on the interior. I'm not going to be using this method on the exterior of this model, as I'm going to be doing a camouflage scheme, and multicolour paint schemes don't work for this type of modulation. You're better off just using pin filters for that. So I'm just going to keep picking different colours, switching them up, and then leaving the original base colour in certain panels. And you can see it just adds a slightly different hue and tint to each panel. Also, I have not actually gloss coated this model in any way. Normally I would do that working with oils. However, the Tamiya paints are so tough that I don't actually have the same fears of the artist's white spirits attacking the preceding layer of paint. So again, you can see it here in effect. I have a little bit too much on my brush, so I'm using the lollipop stick to absorb the excess, and I'm just putting dark blue on one side of the firewall and magenta on the other. And you can see just some very, very faint colour hues between the two flanks of the firewall. It's just an interesting way of just making something that's one colour look a bit more interesting, really. So you can see here by using the deep blue filter, I can change just the intensity of the Dunkelgelb on this side, and then I'll use a different colour on the other side, so it just breaks up the colour and makes it a little bit more interesting to the viewer. So with the colour modulation allowed to dry, now I'm going to start doing the details of our radio rack. So for the radio faces, we're going to be using German grey. I'm going to be very careful not to get this colour where I don't want it. Now I'm going to be using Vallejo model colour for this. Now I'm doing the black details using flat black, and again taking a lot of care not to get this colour where I don't want it. If I do get any overspray or overspill, I'm going to wipe it away immediately with a cotton swab dipped in water. I don't want to leave any stains here, just because I don't want to go back and repaint things this late in. Now I'm painting the backrests for the benches. These are actually separate pieces, and I really should have left these off and painted these separately. It would have made life a lot easier. Just because of the angle of the hull, these were very difficult to paint without getting any overspill. Now I'm switching down to a number one brush, and I'm going to start painting in the dials for the firewall. Again, keeping my paint very thin and trying to stay as neat as possible. I'm also going to paint in the main dial here for the speedometer, and I'm using a mixture of ghost grey for the white sections, and then this Fiston red for the red area. Then for the spare barrel boxes behind the storage racks, I'm just going to use German Camo Beige from Vallejo Model Colour. Just a slightly different colour to the Dunkelgelb. I wanted to break it up ever so slightly. Now switching down to a 1-0, we're going to use some oily steel to start painting in some of the dials and tabs on the radio. Again, being as neat as possible. And a little behind the scenes, I used to use a hairdryer here just to dry things very quickly, so I can just keep speeding away with this build. So now we're going to add some chips to the model, again once everything is dried, and we're going to use a piece of sponge and some German Camo Black Brown from Vallejo Model Colour. I'm just going to focus along the panel lines and some sharp edges really. Now we're moving on to detailing the radio again. This time we're using flat black, and again I recommend using a very fine tip brush like a 0 or 00. And we're just using flat black to paint in the dials and the power outlets for the radio. Now we're moving on to the part I like the most, so we're going to use some 502 Shadow Brown from Octilon. We're going to make a panel line wash here. So I'm just going to tin it down about 70% thinner to oil paint ratio, and we're just going to start focusing here on the panel lines just to bring out this detail. It's also a great way of framing detail. If I want to make parts pop, I'll just give it an outline of this oil wash here. You can see I'm being a little bit messy with it, which is not a problem because we can wipe away the excess once this is allowed to dry with a Q-tip soaked in white spirit just to remove anything we don't want. This is a very forgiving method of detailing, so don't be too worried about it. Also, the oil wash is very good for framing details like this hinge. It just makes the details pop right out. I'm also going to allow it to edge out these details here, just add a bit of shade and make it pop a bit. So with that allowed to dry, we're going to move on to adding some pigments to the floor of the fighting compartment. I'm just going to use 3 random shades of earth and dust here, just from both AK and the old MiG range. That's using a disposable plastic shot glass here. I'm just going to mix them together. And then I'm going to apply them just using an old haggard brush here. I'm just focusing the areas I think that dirt will build up after time. And once you're happy, I'm just going to use some X22 thinner from Tamiya, and I'm just going to use that to lock down the pigments by just saturating the brush and tipping it to the area I want to lock down. And then the last detail I wanted to add some spent brass shells from the machine gun. So I just took some 0.3 brass wire, cut it down to shape, and I'm just going to apply some very thick coats of matte varnish, and I'm just going to sprinkle the brass pieces onto the floor to simulate spent brass. And there you have part 2 of my 251 Ausf Command Halftrack build. Do join me on part 3 where we're going to be building the upper hull and getting ready to do the final painting and highlighting of the exterior. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I've been Shane. I'll catch you in the next video. Happy modelling and bye bye.